They expected the girl standing in the Duke's entrance hall to speak in some common dialect, something that marked her as the scandal everyone whispered about. What they did not expect was for her to walk past every guard, every advisor, every perfectly positioned obstacle, stop 3 feet from Duke Alistair Voss himself, and speak a name no one in the household had dared to utter aloud in 17 years. His mother's name, the name that broke him. And in that single impossible moment, he knew exactly who she was. The morning had begun with rumors. Servants whispered that a young woman had arrived at the gates just after dawn, travel-worn and unchaperoned, carrying only a weathered case and a letter sealed with wax that bore no family crest. She had asked, politely but firmly, to see the Duke. The guard at the gate had refused, naturally. Young women arrived at noble estates with alarming frequency, claiming connections, seeking charity, hoping for scandal. Protocol existed for exactly this reason. But this girl had not argued. She had simply waited. For hours. Standing in the cold without complaint, without theatrics, until the head steward himself finally approached out of sheer curiosity about what kind of desperation kept someone so unnaturally still. "State your business," he had said. "I need to speak to Duke Voss." "That is not an answer. It's the only one I can give anyone but him." The steward had studied her then, noting the quality of her worn cloak. Good fabric, but old. Her boots were practical, well-maintained. Her posture was straight despite obvious exhaustion. She did not fidget, did not plead, just waited with a patience that felt almost aristocratic. Against his better judgment, he allowed her inside. By midday, the entire household knew something unusual was happening. The Duke had been informed of the visitor and had dismissed her outright, without even asking her name. But then, and this was the part that unsettled everyone, the girl had quietly insisted the steward deliver a message. "Tell him," she had said, "that I carry a letter written in a hand he will recognize." The Duke had frozen when those words reached him. His expression had not changed, but those who knew him well recognized the stillness that overtook him when something pierced his carefully maintained control. "Bring her to the hall," he had said. "Now." And so she stood there, surrounded by marble and gold, by portraits of ancestors she would never be allowed to claim, watched by a dozen pairs of eyes that had already decided she did not belong. Duke Alistair Voss descended the main staircase with the measured calm that defined him. He was young still, not yet 30, but grief and responsibility had carved him into something remote and unyielding. His mother had died when he was 12. His father 3 years later. He had inherited too young, loved too briefly, and learned too well that sentiment was a luxury man in his position could not afford. He stopped at the base of the stairs and looked at her for the first time. She was perhaps 18, dark-haired, pale, with eyes that held a steadiness far older than her years. She did not curtsy, did not lower her gaze, simply met his scrutiny with quiet, unflinching calm. "You requested to see me," he said. His voice was even, giving nothing away. "Yes, Your Grace. You claim to carry a letter." "I do." "From whom?" She hesitated, just briefly. "Your mother." The hall went utterly silent. It was impossible, of course. The Duchess had been dead for 17 years. Whatever this girl carried could not be what she claimed. And yet something in the Duke's expression shifted. Not softening, never that, but sharpening, as though she had just said something that demanded his full attention. "That," he said quietly, "is not possible. I know how it sounds." "Then you understand why you will leave this house immediately." "I will," she said, "after you read it." The audacity should have ended the conversation. Instead, it held it suspended, because her tone carried no arrogance, no desperation, only certainty. The Duke stepped closer, close enough now to see the exhaustion beneath her composure, the way her hands trembled slightly despite her stillness. "Who are you?" he asked. She opened her mouth, closed it, then, carefully, said, "I believe the letter will answer that better than I can. I am asking you, and I am trying not to lie to you before you've even decided whether to listen." The Duke stared at her, because that answer, deflection wrapped in honesty, was so precise, so deliberate, it reminded him of someone he had spent years trying not to remember. "Give me the letter," he said finally. She reached into her cloak and withdrew a folded envelope, aged yellow at the edges, sealed with wax that had cracked but not broken. She held it out. He took it. The moment his fingers touched the paper, something cold moved through him. Because he recognized the handwriting on the front. Recognized it with the kind of clarity that only comes from years spent studying every letter, every note, every scrap of written memory left behind by someone you loved. His mother's hand. His gaze snapped back to the girl. Where did you get this? She left it for me. That tells me nothing. Your Grace, she said quietly. Please just read it. He broke the seal. The Duke read in absolute silence while the entire hall held its breath. His expression did not change as his eyes moved across the lines, but his grip on the paper tightened until the edges crumpled slightly beneath his fingers. When he finally looked up, the girl was still watching him with that same unbearable calm, as though she had already prepared herself for whatever came next. Leave us, the Duke said. The command was not loud, but it carried. Servants and advisors exchanged uncertain glances before retreating, their footsteps echoing through the suddenly cavernous space. Within moments, only the two of them remained. The Duke folded the letter slowly, deliberately, and studied her again. This time, he truly looked. The shape of her face, the line of her jaw, the way she held herself, straight-backed, composed, but not cold. Familiar in a way that made his chest tighten. What is your name? He asked. Eliza. Eliza what? Just Eliza. I was raised without a family name. The confirmation landed like a blow. Because the letter had said exactly that. Explained exactly that. His mother, in her final months of illness, had written a confession meant to be delivered only after her death. A confession about a brief, desperate affair during a period of separation from the Duke's father. About a child born in secret and given to a trusted servant to raise far from the scandal that would destroy them all. About a daughter. The Duke's jaw tightened. If this is true, it is. You cannot prove it. No, Eliza agreed. I can't. But I didn't come here for proof. I came because she asked me to. My mother has been dead for 17 years. I know. The woman who raised me kept the letter until I turned 18. Those were her instructions. The Duke looked away briefly, his composure cracking just enough to reveal the storm beneath. Because the letter had been written in his mother's hand, yes. But more than that, it had been written in her voice, gentle, apologetic, heartbroken. It explained her choices, her regrets. It asked forgiveness from a daughter she would never meet and a son who would have to carry the weight of her secret. You should not have come, he said finally. Eliza nodded. I know. There is no place for you here. I know that too. Then why? She hesitated, and for the first time, something fragile crossed her expression. Because she wanted you to know I existed. And because... She paused, swallowing hard. Because I wanted to see where I came from. Just once. The Duke stared at her. Because he understood that feeling more than he wanted to admit. The need to belong somewhere. To be acknowledged. To matter. But acknowledging her would mean scandal. Questions. Threats to everything his family had built. You will stay tonight, he said abruptly. Tomorrow, arrangements will be made for your future. Somewhere far from here. Eliza's expression did not change, but something in her eyes dimmed. I understand. She was given a small room in the servants' wing. Plain, clean, forgettable. Exactly what she expected. But as evening fell and the household settled into routine, Eliza found herself drawn to the library, a vast, silent space filled with more books than she had ever seen in her life. She did not mean to be noticed, but the Duke found her there anyway. He stood in the doorway, watching as she ran her fingers carefully along the spines of old volumes, her expression soft with something close to wonder. You read, he observed. Eliza turned, startled. Yes, Your Grace. The woman who raised me believed education mattered. What did she teach you? Literature. History. Languages. Which languages? French. Italian. Enough Latin to navigate texts. The Duke stepped into the room. Most noble daughters are not taught Latin. I'm not a noble daughter. No, he agreed quietly. You're not. The words should have been cruel. Instead, they sounded tired. Eliza met his gaze steadily. I know what I am, Your Grace. I've always known. I didn't come here expecting anything. Then what did? You expect. To deliver the letter. To leave. To finally stop wondering. The Duke moved closer, stopping near the fire. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. She was kind, he said finally. My mother. Too kind for the world she lived in. Eliza's throat tightened. The letter made her sound gentle. She was. I wish I could have known her. So do I. The admission surprised them both. The Duke looked at her then, really looked, and saw something he had not allowed himself to see before. She was not grasping, not manipulative, not scheming. She was just a girl trying to make sense of a heritage she would never be allowed to claim. And against every instinct, every rule, every piece of careful training that had defined his life, he felt something shift. "What will you do?" he asked. "After you leave here?" Eliza shrugged slightly. "Find work. Survive. It's what I've always done. You deserve better." So did she. The Duke flinched. Because she was right. "Stay," he said suddenly. The word surprised even him. Eliza stared. "Your Grace." Not as, he stopped. Reconsidered. "Not openly. But stay. There are positions here. You could." "I can't," she interrupted gently. "You know I can't." "Why not?" "Because I'll always be the scandal waiting to happen. And you'll always be the Duke trying to control it." The truth of it settled between them, heavy and undeniable. But as she turned to leave, the Duke spoke once more. "Eliza." She paused. "You have her eyes." Her breath caught. And when she looked back at him, tears glistened in those same eyes he had just recognized. "Thank you," she whispered. The Duke did not sleep that night. He sat in his study, his mother's letter spread before him, reading it again and again as though repetition might change what it revealed. But the words remained. The truth remained. And so did the girl sleeping somewhere in his household, carrying a heritage she had done nothing to earn and everything to lose. By dawn, he had made his decision. When Eliza was summoned to his study, she expected dismissal. Perhaps a sum of money. Perhaps a cold, formal farewell. What she did not expect was to find the Duke standing beside his desk with an expression that looked almost uncertain. "Sit," he said. She obeyed, wary. He remained standing, as though movement helped him think. "I have spent the night considering options," he began. "All of them inadequate." "Your Grace, let me finish." His tone was not harsh, but firm. "If I send you away with money, you will be vulnerable. Alone. Unprotected. If I acknowledge you publicly, the scandal will destroy both our lives. If I do nothing." He paused. "If I do nothing, I become complicit in the same silence that shaped your entire existence." Eliza said nothing, because she did not know what to say. The Duke finally looked at her directly. "There is no perfect solution, but there is a better one." "What do you mean?" "I mean you will stay. Not as a servant. Not hidden. But as my ward." Eliza's eyes widened. "That's impossible." "It is unconventional," he corrected. "But not impossible. The story will be that you are the daughter of a distant cousin who recently passed. You will be educated, housed, and provided for as befits your connection to this family. People will talk. People always talk. They'll question it. Let them." Eliza stared at him, disbelieving. "Why would you do this?" The Duke was quiet for a long moment. Then, very carefully, he said, "Because my mother asked me to care for you. And because I have spent 17 years wishing I could do something, anything, to honor her memory." His voice softened. "This is the first real chance I've had." Tears spilled down Eliza's cheeks before she could stop them. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes." She nodded, unable to speak. The transition was not easy. Whispers followed Eliza through every corridor for weeks. Guests scrutinized her at dinners. Distant relatives sent pointed letters questioning the Duke's judgment. But he did not waver. He introduced her calmly, deflected questions with aristocratic precision, and gradually, through sheer force of will and consistency, the household began to accept her presence. More surprisingly, so did he. Eliza was sharp, thoughtful, curious in ways that reminded him painfully of his mother. She asked questions about estate management, listened carefully during discussions, and read voraciously in the library. She did not demand attention, but her presence began to fill spaces in the house that had been empty for years. One evening, months after her arrival, the Duke found her in the portrait gallery, standing before a painting of his mother. "She was beautiful," Eliza said softly. "She was," he agreed, stepping beside her. "Do I really look like her?" He studied the portrait, then her. "Yes, more than I wanted to admit at first." Eliza smiled faintly. "I spent my whole life wondering what she looked like. Who she was. If she ever thought about me." "She did," the Duke said. "The letter made that clear." "I know, but sometimes I still wonder if she regretted me." "She didn't." His voice was certain. "She regretted the circumstances. Not you." Eliza looked at him then, something shifting in her expression. "You didn't have to do any of this. You could have sent me away and no one would have blamed you. I would have blamed myself." "Why?" He considered the question seriously. "Because you deserved better than silence. And because—" He paused. "Because somewhere along the way, this house started feeling less empty. And I realized it was because of you." The admission hung between them, fragile and true. Eliza's voice was barely a whisper. "I'm glad I came home." "So am I." Years later, when people spoke of Duke Alistair Voss, they often mentioned his unexpected kindness toward his young ward. Some still whispered about her origins, of course. But most simply noted that the Duke seemed softer after she arrived, more present, as though some long-frozen part of him had finally thawed. Eliza herself never spoke publicly about the truth. But privately, in the quiet of the library or the gardens, she and the Duke built something neither of them had expected, a family. Not bound by blood alone, but by choice, by forgiveness, by the quiet courage it took to honor the past while building something new. And in the portrait gallery, the Duchess's painted eyes seemed to watch over them both, her gentle smile suggesting she had known all along that love, in the end, finds a way.